Hey everybody, I am Mr. Geeky. Welcome to SpeekyGeeky. Today we have a very special guest, Chris Fawcett, who is going to be releasing the new book, Rad Plastic, in a second edition now. He's just gone forward with his new Kickstarter that is now live. And it's an amazing book. It has a lot of really detailed information in there and a lot of never before seen images and concepts and art. And it's just a phenomenal, pivotal piece of TMNT culture that is just a must have for any collector and any fan. So welcome, Chris. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words about the book as well, of course.
Of course. So tell me a little bit. I mean, how did you get into this in the first place? What prompted you to create this book?
Well, I've been a toy collector for 25 years now, and I also was formerly in the toy industry as an engineer. So I kind of have that background to be able to understand how toys are made, and especially back in the 90s and when it was quite different than it was today after the digital revolution kind of took over a lot of businesses and changed them. So, I was mainly into Star Wars toys early on, and I was always hunting down the various prototypes and things for that, and just sort of stumbled across some things for Ninja Turtles. And because I had been pursuing the Star Wars stuff so much, I knew how to, and my contacts in the toy industry, I knew how to find people and track people down. And so after the first set of things that I found, I decided there was a lot there. And I was like, I could maybe do a book out of this. I was thinking maybe 100 pages, 150. So I'm like, but let me do more research. Like, I'm sure I can find other people to talk to, get the stories beyond this one person that I found initially. And so I started to pursue that, and pretty soon I had this major network of people that were giving me other people's names and recommending me to hey, I'm gonna call up my friend and tell him he should talk to you, and then I'll get him your number, and the guy would call me and we talk to him, and it sort of spider webs out from there, from that initial contact point. And I just kept looking and looking, and I'm like, I'm gonna just keep going until I feel like I've really tapped most of the key players, at least, and a lot of the even the deeper level players. I mean, I think talked to the accountant at Playmates back in the 80s. I mean, that's how deep I went with this, right? I just kept trying to. I quickly found out who the key players were, who the key marketing people were, the creatives that were involved, and got a hold of most of them, and to the point where I was like, okay, I've got really enough here now to do a really nice big 400-page book. And so that was about a 2-year process. And then I started really writing it. And then even over that last year of writing the book, I was visiting more people, and we literally shoved things in like, a week or two before the deadline. I was like talking to my designer, Chance Sanderson, who's fantastic. And he's like, I got one new page. We've got to adjust this, move things around. I'm like, I'm going to drop this page and add this one. He's like, all right. So yeah, it was a fun process.
Through the process, was there an image or like a little piece of information that just kind of blew you away that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, probably the one thing that shocked me the most, that was this out of the blue, I just can't believe this, so there was a line in 1994 called Warriors of the Forgotten Sewer, which was sort of a medieval, it was a play off of Tolkien, Middle Earth. And at first I actually found some design drawings that said Middle Earth turtles on them, and I thought maybe they were trying to license it. But I talked to several people that said, no, that was just a working title. They never intended to license it. They just wanted to do a fantasy line. So there were a couple figures that were never made for that line. Spellcaster Splinter, which is like the Gandalf character. There was a tiger, a war tiger, and there was a repaint of the Savage Leo. And then there was a Michelangelo, who's conspicuously missing from the line, even in the comic book, as a knight. Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Mike that was missing. It was Rapha-Elf that was missing. Mike was in the comic book, so those weren't made. But the interesting thing is the little comic book that came packed in with the toys, Rapha-Elf wasn't even in the comic. So it was really strange. It's like, why are there only 3 of the 4 turtles in here? And so I found some information that they had some previous designs, and I found some early, really rough sketches of the comic book from Dan Berger, who was one of the Mirage artists. And there was a Rapha-Elf in there as an elf. And I'm like, okay, how could they not use Rapha-Elf, right? I mean, oh my gosh. It's so spot on.
Yeah.
Like, of course that would have been the name, Rapha-Elf. But anyway, I then found some concept sketches of an elf figure that was basically 2 or 3 design sketches, along with the sketches for the other figures in the line, the ones that were made, and the Mike Knight and the Splinter. Found a bunch of concept sketches, and in there was a Rapha-Elf. So I'm like, okay, they were definitely considering this figure for the line. But I'm like, well, they booted him out of the comic book probably because they decided to not do that figure, and so they didn't want kids to see Rapha-Elf in the comic book and then wonder where's the elf figure. That's the one I really wanted, and be frustrated. You know, I figured that was it. It made it to design sketch. They nixed it from the comic. You know, it never went to Toy Fair. There's pictures of the other unreleased ones in the Toy Fair catalog, but there's no pictures of that one. I'm like, that's pretty much done. They didn't make it. And then there was one sculptor I was really having a hard time getting hold of. He's pretty private, but I got a hold of another sculptor that he worked with, and he's like, yeah, I'm pretty good friends with him, or was pretty good friends with him. It's like, if you can give me his number, I'll call him up. I haven't talked to him in 20 years, but I'll call him up and tell him like he should definitely talk to you. And so this guy made the connection for me, and then just one day I'm at work, you know, my day job, and out of the blue we get a phone call. And whenever I see a phone call now from Los Angeles, I just pick it up because it might be one of these people I've been trying to contact that's finally getting back to me. So I picked it up, and he's like, oh yeah. We started talking, and he's like, yeah, I didn't work on very much. It's kind of at the end, you know, 94 was sort of towards the end. And I was like, well, you know, is there anything you kept that you have that might be interesting? He's like, I really only have one thing. I'm like, oh, okay. And he says, it's a sculpt I started to work on, but they canceled it and they never finished it. And so I just took home and the clay, it's called, which is the earliest incarnation of the sculpt. And I said, oh, cool. What is it? He's like, oh, it's some like, you know, fantasy figure of an elf. And my jaw, I was like, no way. I even told him this on the phone. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, because, you know, it never got farther than the clay. So they never made a final sculpt. They never made the hard copies. And if, by the way, your viewers don't understand these terms I'm talking about, that's a great reason to get the book, because I explain all of this in there, how the process goes from clay to sculpt to hard copy to tooling and blah, blah, blah. But suffice it to say that that stage was the very, very earliest. So no photos were taken of that piece. No copies were made of that piece. It never went to Toy Fair. It was never photographed. So really the only one that even really knew this existed was the guy that sculpted it. And he still had that in one hard copy he made. And I was like, I have to get this in the book. I have to. This is like one of the most important pieces I've found, you know, to have an unreleased figure that no one knew about, never appeared anywhere in any kind of marketing material at all. Yeah, so that one was the jaw dropper. I mean, I remember so vividly, like where I was at work and the office I was in. I was talking to this guy, and when he mentioned it, I'm like, it's just seared in my brain, because it was such a crazy moment to find out that thing was actually sculpted.
You saw a lot of the unproduced sketches too, correct? As your journey through the book, were there some that kind of surprised you that didn't make it in? I'm sure there's thousands that have to fall to the wayside, but there are some really salient ones too that you're just like, oh, that would have been so cool if. Yeah,
there's a couple I really like, especially the early stuff. So I found one of the marketing guys had a binder of concept sketches that a lot of it came from Mirage that was in this particular binder, but some of like from other people as well. You know, they were in the early years, like pre-1993, when they were really going for the mutated animals thing. You know, after about 93, they started getting to doing just turtles and all kinds of costumes, and there weren't really many new characters, right? But prior to that, they were doing a lot of new mutant animals, and there were tons of concept sketches. I probably have over 100 different concept sketches of different ideas they tried. There's a few of them in the book, but I couldn't even begin to fit them all. There were some really cool ones I liked. There was an Australian Outback line that was going to be like a koala bear that was kind of like your Outback adventurer outfit, kind of not really Indiana Jones-ish, Crocodile Dundee, something like that. Then there was a kangaroo in that line as well, and I'm trying to remember what the third one was. I can't recall right off the top of my head. There's 3 in that line. I thought those were cool. There was a pirate toucan that I thought was awesome. They called him BlackBeak instead of Blackbeard. And it was like toucan figure with the eye patch, and it's a really cool sketch. So there's quite a few like that I really liked. I'm like, oh man, I wish they would have made, you know, BlackBeak the toucan pirate. I think that was a great idea. Yeah. So, you know, they had to pick and choose what they did, and I'm not sure why. I mean, to me, like a BlackBeak toucan pirate seems better than like King Lionheart, but you know, that's just me. But maybe their you know, marketing said that kids liked lions, not birds, so they went with a lion. Yes, probably something like that.
I mean, it definitely feels like that would have been right in line with the kind of characters that we did get. You know, a BlackBeak would have been super cool. And those the Outback characters kind of sound to me a little bit like almost as if they were drawing from TMNT and other Strangeness arenas, right? So like. You know, which would have been incredible to see some of that come in there too, because it would have been like cross-pollination into the main toy line.
Yeah, they did a lot of that. So there's a lot of cool stuff there that made it no further than a sketch on paper. So
that's fantastic. When you were growing up, when you came into the Turtles, was there a character that was always your favorite from that line?
Well, I really came into the Turtles like I was a little bit too old for those as toys. So my Turtle fandom really started with this original stand-up 4-player video game.
Okay, all right.
Because that was
Right
in the student center at college, where I went to college. And so I would play that game a lot in college. So that was sort of my introduction to the Turtles and where my fandom started. But I never really had like a favorite character, I would say, back then, really. Today, it's kind of morphed them. Probably of the 4 Turtles, Leo is my favorite, and I think that's honestly, I like him because he's the leader, and honestly because my favorite color is blue. So I mean, it sounds pretty silly,
simple
but
as that. Yeah,
it's what it is, you know. And then I really, you know, I have like right behind me here, you can see I've got quite a bit of an April focus there in the cabinet.
Nice.
So yeah, as far as the toy collection goes, April stuff is kind of the thing I gravitate to. So whenever an April piece comes up, I try to snag it.
That's fantastic. As you were creating this, did you come across the Mutant April? That was kind of always a big thing with the fans, is that they saw the inkling of the possibility there's going to be this Mutant April. We did get the mutation April, where it's like you could pop the head and, you know, and change it in, but there was another one where it was going to be, I think, I don't know if it was tied in with the monster line, the Universal monster line, but it was like a werewolf.
Yeah, the werewolf April. So yes, actually I have that sculpt right over here. It's let me grab it. Give me a second.
Ooh, very cool.
And so here's the
that's beautiful.
This is another one that's sort of a surprise. So this is wax, so I'm being very, very careful with it. It actually was never finished. You can see the legs aren't articulated. The arms are, but the legs aren't. So
that's amazing.
So this is a piece, this is wax, so super fragile. You can see some of the fingers are broken even on it. So the story behind that one is that you know, Michael Dooney did some sketches of April as a cat relatively early. He also did some sketches of the monsters relatively early. He had a Frankenstein for sure that was early, and a mummy sketch. I'm talking like, I'm guessing these were like 90, 91. I'd have to go back and look to be sure. And the April was sort of in that same era. I don't know if he intended it to be part of that monsters genre line or not. Probably did, because it was a werewolf. He clearly had it marked as a werewolf. Or April as cat, I think it was. So, you know, several years later, I think they resurrected those Dooney sketches and said, hey, let's do this Universal Monsters line. They were getting to the tie-ins with Star Trek, and so they got a license to do the Universal Monsters, and that was one of the ones that was going to be released. I'm 90% sure, and the reason why is because I found out that, you know, one sculptor did at least the first year series of those, and that sculptor also sculpted this piece. So the fact that it's sort of monsterish, and the sketches were done at the same time period, and the same sculptor that did some of the other monsters did this one, it sort of seems right that that was probably an idea they were playing with for April for the Universal Monsters line, and decided to go with the first 4 they did in the first year, and then the second year they decided to do the Bride of Frankenstein instead of a werewolf. Probably because they already had the Leo werewolf, so why do we need another werewolf? Let's different with April, maybe something more female-centric related, which Bride of Frankenstein makes a lot of sense on.
And yeah, I mean, and it does look, when I'm thinking back here too, it does look remarkably different than the, like, her cat mutant version that was in the cartoon too, you know, the animated series. So I mean, that seems more in line that it would have been part of that Universal Monsters line in terms of like the aesthetics of it.
So I don't think it went any farther than that preliminary wax. I don't think any further steps were taken in that. So that's, you know, probably the only stage that exists out there is the sketches in that one piece.
That's amazing that you have that. That's really, really freaking cool.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites, especially, you know, like collecting the April stuff to have that piece.
Are there any others in your collection that are just your favorite pieces? And everyone's got that in their collection where they
yeah, for sure. Let me grab one.
Okay.
This is, I mean, I don't tell, which is cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want you to have to handle all these, and but I'm super excited to see what it is.
So I think my favorite figure of the entire line is this guy right here.
Oh yeah.
Just so dynamic with the wind blown, the cloak and the beard. So this is Spellcaster Splinter, unreleased Warriors of the Forgotten Sewer, would have been from 1994. So this is a hard copy, which I said earlier, like, you can check the book out, but one thing hard copies are not. It's like pinned together. Like, this is resin. It's not plastic. It's not all assembled like in a factory. So this is like hand cast, hand painted. So yeah, this is one of my favorites for sure. Probably this is my favorite figure. Like if all my other Ninja Turtle stuff had to go, this might be the last one I would keep. I guess he was like, if the Earth is being destroyed and you're going off in a rocket to Mars, and you can only take one figure, what would you take? It'd probably be this one for me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful figure. I mean, I like how much detail there is with like it's like the flowing cape too. It's not just it has, you know, it's like you can see the folds in the cape and in the robe.
Here for now, safely
cool.
in there. Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites for sure.
Do you follow the modern lines, the new stuff that's been coming out through like NECA and Super 7 and Playmates? And
yeah, I mean, you know, I'm on a lot of Facebook online groups and stuff like that, so I see it, and it's really, I mean, the NECA stuff is fantastic, and I got some friends here in town that are Turtles guys, and we get together, and so I get to see it at their house. I don't have I mean, I would love to collect it, but mainly I don't have the space. And secondly, if I've got some extra money to spend, I'd rather spend it on vintage stuff than newer stuff. So that's just my personal preference. You can't have everything, so you got to draw the line somewhere. Yeah. So I love that. I love the Super 7 stuff too. The one thing I do want from that is that NECA April. I would like to get that, but I really don't want the whole 2-pack. And so, and they're I think they're out of print now. So I don't know how much they're going for on eBay, but maybe someday that would be one piece for NECA I want to add, is that April.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like the original where it became very difficult to find. You know,
yeah,
and it's
maybe they'll do a re-release of that or a repaint or something. That would be good. I could pick up.
That's the rumor that's going on right now, is that either the new San Diego exclusive or NECA has been teasing Channel 6, and that they have the cat in front. So the thought was that they may be actually re-releasing April as being able to kind of like what they did with Rat King and Vernon, where they have the swappable parts, and then it could be Mutant Cat April, which allows them to be able to put a different face sculpt and stuff on there too, more accurate too. But yeah, I'm in that same boat where it was just like April was always one of my favorite characters. Also, I always gravitated to April and Irma. Irma was kind of my jam. I was such a nerdy kid that I think I was just really related to that. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, I'm in the show now. But were you a fan of the animated series too? Or I know you're saying you are more into the vintage toys and you got into this kind of late in terms of, I don't know if you ever went back and watched any of the stuff or the newer stuff.
I've watched some of them. I mean, I even in college, I was the guy that like would get off of school and go do my homework, and I would turn on the afternoon cartoons and watch Darkwing Duck while I was doing my, calculus homework. I mean, that's just how it was. So yeah, those things came on, at that time, and they were on TV and stuff. So I caught a few of them then. I've watched some of them since, especially like the first season. I can't say I was ever like a ravenous fan of the cartoons, but yeah, I definitely liked it and was into it. But really, it's like, I don't know, the toys really caught my eye just in the last few years, mainly because of finding some really interesting things and sort of my eyes opening to how great the sculpts are in the line and the aesthetics of the whole line, how interesting it was, just really sort of fascinated me. It's like, you think about comparing out of my Star Wars, you look at the Star Wars line, it's like, there's so many figures that are just like, oh, here's a white stormtrooper with a little black trim. Here's an Imperial commander. He's got a gray outfit. Here's even like Luke Bespin, tan. It's like, and then you look at the Ninja Turtles, you're like, bam, color explosion. All right. So that kind of grabbed my attention when I started really getting into the line a little bit because of how different it was from the Star Wars stuff that was sort of real world and muted colors and things. And the Ninja Turtles were sort of the opposite of that.
Nice big palette there. When you were working on the book, was there a section that was the most exciting for you to really dig into with your background too? I imagine there's certain sections that you gravitate towards in terms of where your interest level is.
Yeah. I'd say there's a couple of them. I'll mention my three favorite sections probably. The first one is the first chapter in the book because I was able to talk to John Handy, who was he was the marketing guy on the Turtles in 1987 at Playmates. So when they were conceptualizing this whole line, I mean, he came up with some of the key things they did. He worked on changing the bandanas to different colors so you could distinguish the turtles, because that's not how it was in the comic. He had tons of concept sketches. So seeing some of these really early stuff where they were still trying to figure out, what are we doing with this? At one point the bad guys were all going to be humans as opposed to the good guys being the animals. They did away with that. There's different characters and sketches and ideas and even toy concepts. Like there was some where there was this little gun trigger that would make the figures move their arms, that was in 1987. They revised that later for the Smash and Bash line. You know, there were several things like that. Packing Comic was conceptualized in 87. They revived that later for the Warriors of Forgotten Sewer line. So it's like to see all this early stuff that they were trying, you could see sort of the process of them trying to figure it out. Like, what do we want to do with this property? We think there's something here, but like, it's got to be something a little different than what it is. It can't be this super serious adult kind of comic, sort of stylized and a little bit violent. Like, we got to make it, we got to kidify it, right? And so to see them walk through that was really great. And that's what the whole first chapter is about. The next one was really the Warriors of the Forgotten Sewer, which I mentioned before, just because I found such a depth of material on that line, unlike any of the others. You know, you look at the Adventurer Turtles, and they didn't have this backstory in a comic book and like all these unreleased characters, and like, you know, it was just, let's release some turtles in some like Arctic gear and one that looks like Safari Guy, you know, and those are great. But for some reason, it seemed like that Warriors of Forgotten Sewer, they were really trying to do something deeper with it than just release a figure in an outfit. And so, you know, I found some typed up pages of several different concepts for the comic book and where the stories are all a little different. I found, like I mentioned earlier, a complete rough panel, pencils only, really rough sketches of an alternate comic book. Again, it's similar, but clearly different steps, where Rapha-Elf was in it. And then, you know, the sketches for the final comic, and then the unreleased figures. And then, you know, to be able to find that elf at the end and like find sketches for all the figures through. I mean, you almost look at it, and I got the book laid out largely by chapters, but in the middle of that 1994 chapter, there's a whole section that's almost like a mini subchapter on the Warriors of Forgotten Sewer, just because there's so much depth there. So I really loved doing that. And then the third and last one is just the last few pages of the book called Behind the Scenes, where it's just a montage, and there's not really much writing there. There's no writing there, actually. It's pictures of me and, you know, all the people that helped with the book. You know, my wife did a lot of help, and my cohorts, Gary Borbage, Stephen Ward, Matt George. And I tried to get a photo of every person that I met face to face. So you'll go to the back of that book and you'll see a lot of the people that worked on the Toys You Love are in those photos, and behind the scenes stuff of us digging in boxes and doing all kinds of crazy things. So that section that's more of a personal love section, obviously, because it's like, it's my story, right? It's my nostalgia for the time I spent doing this book.
Yeah, well, it's a love letter, right? I mean, and that's the thing too, is that's what I appreciate, is and that's what I think is important for the fans too, is that, you know, to see the faces of the people that help to bring the things that they cherish to life, right? Yeah. And I think it brings so much joy, and you have so many memories with being able to have these adventures with these toys. And it's fantastic to be able to expand that out and say, brought to you by, you know, here's all the people that help to create these favorite things. And it's being able to celebrate it back. And because it's such a fun community of people who really care deeply about the franchise, right? Regardless of what the toy franchise is, there's always the behind the scenes pieces to it that are so important. Right. And when you're talking about the comic here too, to me that also shows just how much they were investing in that, right? It kind of excites me even further towards thinking about the idea of, well, had this gone off and had this actually happened, right? How much further could that have gone too, right? Not just the primary line, but I mean, it sounds almost like they were going a little bit of like the He-Man route there, with where they would do the package in comics, right?
Right. Yeah, almost like let's set up all these alternate universes and have comics based on those and toys based on those, and here's a fantasy one, and here's an adventure one, and here's a sci-fi one, or whatever it might be. And yeah, they might have been thinking that, but unfortunately, the Warriors of Forgotten Sewer lasted 1 year. I don't think it sold very well, so
I know.
Kind of crashed that whole idea. But
that's such a bummer. Did you see other, and I'm sure you cover this in the book too, were there other iterations that you just thought like how cool this would have been had this come out? Like, I mean, they did there's the Star Trek Turtles, there was, you know, the different, like you said, after 93, I think they started doing those co-branded more of that, where you would see the Universal monsters, you saw the Star Trek, were there others that you were coming across that were at the conceptual stage, or maybe got even a little bit further, that you thought to yourself like, man, it's a shame this didn't come to fruition?
Yeah, well, the obvious answer is the Star Wars Turtles. I mean,
oh sure.
Those or the Indiana Jones Turtle. I mean, those went to concept sketches. I haven't really nailed it down, but I think what was happening there is so Lucasfilm had a bunch of companies pitching the toy line in about 95, I think, pitching to them to get some of the licenses, and Playmates was one of those. And they did a whole line of, there's fascinating line of Star Wars Playmates toys concept pieces that are out there. You can see some of them in my friend's book, Toys Time Forgot, which he has 3 volumes of, and some of them are in there, and I supplied some of those photos for him. But they did a whole bunch of Star Wars stuff that pitched to Lucasfilm, and I think those concepts for the Turtles might have been part of that pitch. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it's like, it makes sense. If they're going to get the line for Star Wars, why wouldn't they, in '94, why wouldn't they also consider doing a Star Wars Turtle crossover, right? So in Indiana Jones as well. But there's also an ET concept that's out there. Doctor Who, I think that was mostly just one of the artists loved Doctor Who and thought it'd be cool. I don't think it really went anywhere other than the artist drawing some sketches because he thought it was cool and submitting them. So, and then, you know, there were several lines, especially towards the end, that weren't made. There's supposed to be a whole another line of sports turtles that would have been in like 97 or 96, and a line of police turtles. So they were going to do, you know, a police line with the turtles being the good guy cops and FBI agents and whatever, and the bad guys being, you know, crooks and hooligans and having a getaway car and bank robbers and stuff. And that might have been cool. It didn't get very far. There's some sketches of some concepts out there and like a logo, but I haven't even seen any color sketches of those. It's all just black and white. So yeah, there's lines like that would have been pretty cool.
Well, and what's exciting too now is that it feels like some of those co-branded pieces are now starting to make it to plastic. So Hasbro just, I think, announced with the crossover turtles. Did you see this or hear about this? Where it's between Turtles and Power Rangers, or like Turtles as Power Rangers. And I don't know if that opens up some more floodgates towards. I was talking to Steve Werner about who would have the rights to do some of those conceptuals, right? So the early images, the early stuff that never made it, to me, that's like an extra layer of, you know, fandom there, where people are seeing the, you know, every iteration has their versions of the turtles, and they're expanding those lines. But like, this is one where, you know, these are all these characters who we never got to see, who we never got to embrace and love the way we did with the others, because we didn't know they existed. But now there's an opportunity there, I think, especially with this resurgence of all this turtle love. Not that it went away, but now it's you know, blossoming again. And to me, it's kind of fun to think about the idea of, okay, could we finally see some of these characters as toys?
Yeah. You know, Playmates toys would be the ones that have the license, at least for now. I did hear that one of the things that was in the contract when Peter Laird sold the rights over to Nickelodeon was that the license would stay with Playmates for the toys. So I don't know for sure. I'm guessing that was probably time bound, because I can't imagine, you know, Nickelodeon signing off on infinite time life for the life company. So maybe they had it for 10 years or 20 years. Right now, obviously Playmates has it. So if anything like that were to be released as insofar as like a kid's toy, you know, Playmates would be the one to do it. I think we're far more likely to see some of these concepts come out in a Super 7 or a NECA, who have, you know, those are different licenses. Then Playmates is basically the child's toys, and NECA and Super 7 are obviously more geared towards adult collectors and collectability. So I think we're more likely to see one of them put out some of these concepts in their own thing, more so than Playmates would take an existing vintage sculpt and tool it and release it. I would be surprised if they did that. But ultimately, you know, Playmates is the one that has the rights. I mean, you know, like we talk about the Spellcaster Splinter, right? They paid for that work. They paid the design studio, which that one wasn't Farner, that was a different design studio, but they paid it on, you know, the design studio to do the work. You know, they paid the artists to draw the things up. So it was all part of the business that Playmates had. So Playmates / Nickelodeon still own the rights to the Spellcaster Splinter figure and its aesthetics and everything like that. So if somebody were to release it, it would be them. But, you know, obviously NECA and Super 7 could do their own stylized version based on that, just like they do with all the rest of the figures.
Yeah, there's an element too where I almost think to myself, I'm sure you've seen this in some of the early images too, where like the early playset, right? The early Turtles playset almost felt like there was a scrap character, right? Where there was like this entity that was like this giant face, that I think that was in the early inception, where they decided not to do it because that was like too deity-like, but it felt very much like Zordon. So when I hear like there's like the turtle, this crossover, I'm like, are we gonna see, is there a possibility that we could see the face here, you know?
Yeah, could be.
So do you have a favorite vehicle, perhaps?
Yes, actually. My favorite vehicle is unproduced. I think it's in 1991. I recall.
There's the whole like murky area of, do the oversized mutants count as vehicles, right? Because technically they're vehicles, but like Killer Bee or Needle Nose, you know.
Killer Bee, yeah. Okay, so here's my favorite. It's the
Oh,
it was never made, but there are I got these file photographies of the prototype.
That's
so
amazing.
Basically this was a car that you drop a soda can into, and somehow there'd be a lever or something that would puncture the soda can, and the carbonation spewing out would propel the car forward.
Oh, that's smart.
And it's smart. And I asked the marketing guy, like, why did you never do that? He's like, we didn't know how to market it. It's like, is it an indoor toy? It can't be an indoor toy. What a mess that would make. Is it an outdoor toy? You really want your kid like wasting soda cans every 5 minutes to see this thing? How expensive that would be for a parent? Go buy me a 24 pack of Coke so I can run my car and empty it onto the road. He's like, we just couldn't figure out how to market it, even though it seems like I'm sure kids would have loved it, right? It's a fun idea for a toy. But you got to ultimately remember that the parents are the ones buying it for the kids. And a parent's going to be thinking all these things like, if he does that inside, I'm going to have a mess. I'm going to have to buy him cans all the time. And a parent's going to go, no, we're not going to do that. So they had to nix that. But I wish that prototype would turn up. That'd be one thing I'd love to have that I've never seen. Just some file photography.
Yeah. To me, it's like, it feels like you have Coke do the advertising for you. I mean, this is, it's going to be getting a huge boon to their,
cross promotion, right?
Yeah,
surely.
Right.
Yeah. Ninja Turtles and Coca-Cola.
Right. It can't possibly be more messy than Ooze, which, which I think got into everything. I remember I used to have the little canisters. It was like canisters, and you'd have like a little Splinter in there. Or you'd have the unmutated turtles. And it just, I think it ended up in my sister's hair, and it ended up, and we got rid of so many clothes because of that. I think my parents probably would have been like, a Coke car? Fine.
It'll be outside.
This point, it can't be worse. Well, I wanted to ask you too. So in your Kickstarter, I saw the stretch goals. You were going to be expanding out some different chapters, it looked like. First of all, that's amazing, and I'm very excited to hear about that, because and part of this too is that I know this is such a wonderful thing for fans who weren't able to get the book the first time around, to be able to get this and now have additional possible chapters to this. So it's like director's cut.
Yeah, a little bit.
But my question too is, for those who did buy the original book, will there be something that maybe you'll expand on once you get to the stretch goals that would allow them to kind of, for people who already own it, to be able to come in and sub into that specific thing as kind of like a thank you to those who, who were there from the beginning?
So if we only get to like 1 or 2 of those, I don't think I could do this. But if we get all 3 of them knocked out, I'm thinking about releasing like a soft cover 40-page addendum. Just be a very thin book that would have those new chapters, just those new chapters. I'd still have to get, a decent number of people that wanted to order it, because there's minimum print runs and things like that. And, I sold like 1,000 of the first book. So unless I could get about maybe half the people to sign up for this addendum, it would be way cheaper. I don't know what the price would be, but certainly less than half of what the hardcover book would be. But I think unless I can get all 3 of those chapters funded and get to like 40-45 pages, I'm not sure it'd be worth doing like just one of them in a 12-page book. It's like so if that can't happen, I'll probably eventually end up posting some of these pages online somewhere at some point so that people can see them, or maybe not the pages, but at least the images will eventually be posted. So maybe you're missing the text, but you can still see some of it. So but that could be a ways down the road. If it goes well and we get all 3, I could potentially see doing that mini addendum book maybe even next year sometime. So, because I'm planning this one to be shipped by December, hopefully. So that would be a project I could do maybe starting early next year.
That's great. Is there anything with the new components that you want to have as like a tease here too? I don't know if there's anything that you don't have to, but I'm just.
I'll say this. I'm most excited about the sculpting chapter, which is why I put it first as the bonuses, because it's the one I want to do the most. So, and the reason why is after the book was already printed and released, actually just this year in 2021, we discovered some of the really early sculpts, not 1988, not like that early. I don't want to tease too much, but some of the favorite characters from like, 90, 91 era, we found some sculpts for. So I'd love to get those images out in a nice big printed format. So yeah, so there's my tease. I won't tell you which ones, but it'll be some that I think the fans would be super stoked to see the original sculpts of some of the fan favorites for sure.
Very cool. There are some different images that I've seen over the years here too that I think about. Do you have a top couple? BlackBeak as an example, right, of concept stuff that you would want as figures. For instance, there was a character that it's always kind of been one of my, I don't call it white whale, right, where you have, which ironically would be in this line, it could be a literal whale.
It could be a whale.
Right.
There we go. We need a turtle whale crossover. We need a whale mutant for sure.
Oh, 100% I would take a whale mutant. There's so many, like there's so many, that's the thing, is like the options do not stop. There are so many great possibilities there. But like there was one I had heard about it. I don't know if this is in the book or not, but I'm guessing it is. It seems it's a very detailed book, so I'm assuming it probably is. But there was a character I heard about that just had such an incredible name, and I think it'd be just such a shame to not have it at some point, which was of a Yeti, and it was called Machete Yeti.
Yeah, that's one of the few concept sketches I do have in the book. I don't have a whole lot in there, but that's one that is in there. Awesome. Yeah, that's Machete Yeti would be another great one. I mean, the name's just so great. They did so much with puns, and that's one of the best puns I've heard. And that sketch is in the book for sure. If anybody listening wants to see it, grab yourself a copy. It's in I think it's in the second chapter.
That's amazing. Well, and it reminded me too, I said a little bit about this earlier too, how it was like the cross-pollination stuff, how when you were talking about the Outback characters, right? There were characters that kind of dovetailed into the other Strangeness, but this Machete Yeti, there was a character in the Archie series that felt like there's a character that it seems similar to, and that's a conversation that I find very intriguing, is the idea of, certain characters that never ended up in the cartoon series as an example, but did end up as toys in the Playmates line, right?
Yeah. So that early area, pre-92 probably for sure, there was a lot of synergy between the guys making the cartoons, Playmates, and Mirage, and what is going on in the comics and the Archie comics. They were all coming up with character ideas. From Playmates side, it was the sculpting houses, the design houses. From the cartoon side, it was the designers there, and then Mirage, obviously, the guys writing the comics, and we're all coming up with characters. And the more they could cross-pollinate those characters, the better all of them would do. If a kid could see, a character on the cartoon, go buy the toy, and then get the comic book and the characters in all of them, that's was the ideal. The constraint was really always mostly Playmates, because, you can only do so many toys in a line for budget reasons, number one, and then just saturation. You can't put out 100 turtle toys in a year. Like, people can't handle that many. So they were always the ones that were looking for what's the best toy one. And so they would pick from those. But then the Mirage guys, they might have pitched a couple that they really liked, like, well, it's not going to make it a toy, but I like him so much, I'm going to put him in the comic anyway. So that happened quite a bit. And the cartoon was probably the middle ground between the two. It's like really easy to throw a new character in a comic, really hard to make a new toy, and the cartoon was sort of in between.
Did it seem like there were characters that were considered for the toy line that got pretty far but didn't end up making it into it, that were in the series, like Fugitoid, right? It to me is one of those that started with Mirage, or started, it started very early on. I was shocked that wasn't, I think in my mind, because I knew him as a comic character and I knew him as a action figure, I think I ingrained it in my head that he was a character in the cartoon, and he never was. That's one where it's just like, I wonder too, given a long enough time period, would some of these characters have made it into the series also?
Yeah, possibly. I don't think there was any characters like that early on that they started design on and never went to production on. You really don't start seeing anything unreleased by Playmates until certainly 94. I'm trying to think if there was anything in like 93, but early on in that line, it was like they were going full bore and things were going so well. Everything they could put out, they put out and was sold. So, the line was so hot that the constraint was really based on not, we're going to tool this up or we're going to present this at Toy Fair and see if people want it. And then if they do, we'll produce it. It was the early years wasn't like that. It was like anything we have the budget to do, we're going to do because it's going to sell. So there really weren't any early figures, definitely not pre like 91, that got to some kind of sculpting stage or prototype stage that wasn't released. You really don't start seeing that until later in the line. And a lot of the ones even later in the line are line extensions. Like you have like the Jim Lee Leo that wasn't released. You know, you've got the Warriors of Forgotten Sewers that we already talked about that weren't released. You have there was a couple Metal Mutants that made it all the way through prototyping stage that were never released. There was a couple lines, like there was a, talking about Power Rangers earlier, there was a line of very Power Ranger-esque turtles called Team Ninja that were in the Toy Fair catalog as photographs. And then we discovered that they actually did make it to 3D, and there's 3 of the 4 exist in painted prototype hard copies. So that line, the whole line was canceled there. They never even did that, but not so much in the early stuff. I haven't seen any evidence of like some cartoon or Archie comic book character that they like, let's sculpt this up, and then they killed it. I don't think that ever happened.
Well, you're right. It was interesting too, because you could see the different mediums kind of influencing each other as it progressed on. And I'd be curious to know more about those early days too, because that must have been such a trip to kind of see from the inception and see how it kind of migrated from not knowing a full picture as to how to present it to kind of moving along as it progressed towards it shaping into something that they knew what it was now. Because you could see that in the early days too, with even the movie, right? The first movie versus the second movie, where the first movie felt more like the Mirage comic. It felt very closely identified to the source material, where they still weren't using their weapons to kill because it's all ages, but it was less slapsticky bantery than part 2, which seemed to me that part 2 was more influenced, I think, by the cartoon.
Yeah, for sure.
Which could be why part 2 is probably more of my favorite, because of the time period where it's just like, that's where I was at. I was like, I want the cartoon. I want, I can't have Bebop and Rocksteady, so I'll take Toucan Razar. Were you a film guy too? Did you see the movies as they were coming out?
I didn't see them as they were coming out, but I've seen them since then, yeah. Okay. I don't think I saw them in the theater back in the day, but I definitely have seen them since then.
Was there a favorite of the original 3?
Yeah, I think I like the first one the best, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems, I don't know, it's most, I don't know, maybe because to me, not really growing up with a cartoon, that one that seems the most sort of realistic, as realistic as a mutant ninja turtle can be. So I kind of like that one.
There's an inherent suspending of belief, once you once you get to that, the sky's the limit. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Very, very interesting stuff. And I'm really excited to see how this book progresses with the Kickstarter. I am really excited for the idea that a lot more people will be able to get their hands on these, because it's such a cool thing that is just, it's really, really, you can see the love that's put into this book. And I think once you have it, you will realize it too. So I want to throw this to you. How can people get a hold of you? Where should they find you? How can they learn more about your Kickstarter? Let us know.
Yeah. So first of all, website, radplastic.com. You can go there, and right below the intro thing is a link to the Kickstarter page. So that's probably the easiest way to go to Kickstarter. You can also go to Kickstarter directly and just do a search for Rad Plastic. It'll come up. So that's where you can find that. It's running through the end of the month. I think I run it through August 1st because like that's the weekend, and I wanted to run it all the way through the weekend. So it's running through just through July mostly. And so the book's $60 plus shipping. I'm shipping to most countries. If you see a country that's not on there that you want to get it to, let me know. I can probably add it. I just literally wasn't going to go through and add every single country on the planet in there. But as people have been asking, I've been adding a few. So you can also go to Facebook.com/radplastic. You can find me there. That's where I post some interesting things, about just news about what's going on. Oh, I should also mention on the radplastic.com site, I've got like t-shirts and stickers and things like that with like Rad Plastic type logos and stuff on them. So those are cool. The one shirt that everybody really loves is this mashup. It's like the Scooby-Doo Mystery Machine, but with the turtle van. Ooh. It's like going, it has a Rad Plastic across it. So everybody loves that one. It's a cool mashup. So yeah, Instagram, Chris.Fawcett. You can find me there. I post random things there occasionally just for fun. Like just when I get a whim, I'll go take a picture of something and splash it up on there. So you can find me there as well. Yeah, I'd love to chat with fans. You got any questions or want to get a hold of me, just Facebook Messenger, send me a message, and I'm happy to chit chat with people. So
amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. Very, very interesting and in-depth conversation. So I appreciate your time, and it's a phenomenal book. And it's just the page, it's like you can see the labor of love that goes into it with every page. Chris Fawcett, again, check out his Kickstarter, check him out, keep talking with him on all the different socials, and thank you for being here with us. This is great.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Rad Plastic is the name of the book.
Yes.
Go get it. You're not going to regret it.
Thanks so much.
This was a blast.
Yeah.
And cut.